The Forum at 8 on SAFM.
At 7 minutes past 8, the Forum at 8 today, the question we ask, will this new cabinet reshuffle bring about good governance and service delivery? As you've heard, new cabinet ministers will be sworn in today after President Jacob Zuma sacked Communications Minister Dina Pule, Human Settlements Minister Sexwale and Co-operative Governance Minister Baloyi yesterday. He replaced them with Connie September, Yunus, Carrim and Lechesa Tsenoli, respectively. He also appointed some deputy ministers. And to just talk a little bit more about the appointments, what they mean for governance and service delivery, we say a very good morning and welcome to Professor Stephen Friedman, Director of the Centre for the Study of Democracy, Rhodes University and University of Johannesburg, as well as Ms. Lebohang Peku, Political and Economical Analyst. Confirmed on the program today as well is Professor Susan Boyson. She's a professor in the Graduate School of Public and Development Management, Wits University, and the author of The ANC and the Regeneration of Political Power. A very good morning to you all, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us.
Hi, morning. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Lechesa.
Let me first start with you, Professor Friedman. The reshuffle as a whole, do you get the rationale behind it? And would you say it was strategic, as some are describing it?
Well, it is, I think it's less strategic than previous cabinet reshuffles in two respects. I mean, the one strategic move seems to be the removal of Sexwale, which might look strategic in the short term. I think it's going to be very unstrategic in the longer term, because you're really sending a message to people who opposed the winners at Mangaung that they may not be welcome in government. And, you know, if you're not offering people posts within the ANC, which they're not, I mean, that group has more or less been removed from most posts within the ANC, and you're not offering them posts in government, why should they stay? I think as far as the other appointments are concerned, not strategic in the sense that they're trying to shore up Mr. Zuma's position within the ANC. I suspect they're trying to send a message. Everybody who's been appointed, I mean, if you look at public perceptions and perceptions of people involved in politics, if I can put it this way, everybody who's been appointed has a reputation for public service rather than self-service. In other words, you know, whether you approve of them or not, people like Connie September coming out of COSATU, Lechesa Tsenoli coming out of Sanko, Yunus Carrim coming out of the UDF and out of the SABC, Michael Masuta, Deputy Minister with a long record of campaigning for disability rights, Pamela Tshwete with her links to the tradition of the ANC in the Eastern Cape. I mean, these are all people who are considered principled public servants who really are trying to do a political job rather than to feather their own nest. So I suspect the strategic move here is to try to send a message to the ANC constituency and the country that government has heard complaints about selfish politicians, and that it's trying to indicate that it is willing to appoint people who have reputations for principle.
Ms. Peku, I'd like to focus on the Departments of Energy and Transport, two very important portfolios here. But yet we've had President Jacob Zuma literally swapping the ministers, Ben Martins from Transport to Energy, Dipuo Peters to Transport, from Transport to Transport from Energy. Your reading of that, and was it necessary?
No, it wasn't necessary, and one really wonders why these things are done. What possible rationale can there be for that? One of the negative features, the positive features of cabinet reshuffles under Jacob Zuma is that there is more accountability than there was in the past. Under Thabo Mbeki, there just weren't cabinet reshuffles, so it didn't matter how you perform. Under Jacob Zuma, as we see in the Dina Pule case, for example, if there is public pressure, you might be removed. But the downside of the Zuma cabinet reshuffles is that there does seem to be this constant tendency to shift people sideways. And you wonder what on earth that can possibly be about. Are we seriously suggesting that Ben Martins, really there was a dreadful mistake he made? He's really very good at energy. He's not very good at transport. Dipuo Peters is really a transport person rather than an energy person. It's confusing to people. It disrupts the departments. And part of the message, part of what you're trying to do in a cabinet reshuffle is you're trying to send messages. You're trying to send messages of what government wants done and doesn't want done and what it approves and doesn't approve. What message you send by shifting two ministers sideways escapes me. So, the uncomfortable feeling is left that in that position, it's simply a message to people to say, well, look, you'd better watch over your shoulder because, we're in charge here and we can decide what we do with you. It doesn't really send a message that this is being done in order to make sure that public service is improved.
Right. And now I do believe that Lebohang Pheko is back on the line with us. Ms. Pheko, I was asking about the rationale of swapping these two very important portfolios, energy and transport, and Professor Friedman was saying that the problem is that it seems that ministers are being moved sideways. Part of the complaint is that the lack of efficiency in government is that of not allowing ministers to remain long enough. Now, looking at the problems that transport is beset with at the moment, Ben Martins, was it a well thought out move? Dipuo Peters taking her to transport, also considering that there are challenges in that portfolio at the moment. Your thoughts on that?
I think that there's kind of a systemic issue that we need to look at, and that's really the method and the deployment method of appointment. And there are also a couple of scenarios. The one is that this means that we have about 6 effective working months before electioneering begins. The government needs to be seen to make good on its mandate of 2009. Now, whether or not these ministers in these key positions are going to be able to deliver on this in 6 months is really debatable and extremely doubtful. The second thing is that it could also be seen as a sort of slightly delayed reaction to the post-Mangaung consensus, or perhaps lack thereof. So, the notion of certain people being rewarded or certain people being perhaps banished, such as Minister Sexwale, for example. And the third scenario is the notion of incentivizing the lower and more mediocre performers, with the notion that if they don't perform well or adequately, they will be shifted aside. But more importantly than that, with the notion or the expectation that the people who are incoming, as you rightly say, are more strategically positioned. But I certainly think that the notion and the concern is far more fundamental than this particular reshuffle. Mm-hmm. It does seem as though the president is want to shift things around and shift people around at moments where he needs to be seen to be asserting power. This is, I think, the fourth reshuffle in almost as many years. And that's quite a high amount. It's quite a high number. And it's never just one or two people moving sideways or upways, or it's usually fairly drastic. And this has been fairly drastic as well. And I think a lot has been said about some of the appointments which we perhaps would have wanted to see and people would have expected to see, perhaps the Minister of Basic Education being shifted aside or perhaps being moved completely out of cabinet, and that has not happened. So it's really mediating between the power relations of the tripartite alliance, COSATU, SABC, and the ANC, which are very fragile and at the moment, particularly with Mr. Bavi's slightly less enthusiastic support and endorsement of Jacob Zuma than he had about 6 years ago. And of course, the need to begin to certainly draw in those elements. Hence, you have some of the appointments who are alumni of SABC, alumni of COSATU, and seem to have really impeachable public service records, has been said. But I think it's really much more about making sure that the tripartite center is kept very, very solid.
Professor Susan Boyson, just on the issue of that, if we are saying that it's an effort in the regeneration of political power, for instance, then post-Mangaung ramifications, questions are being asked why certain people have been left behind. I would say mainly Minister Paul Mashatile, the Arts and Culture Minister. Is it because, as some suggest, that President Zuma cannot afford to alienate somebody who has as much influence as he does in the Gauteng region? Fikile Mbalula, why does he remain? And as Ms. Pheko here spoke about people like Angie Motshekga, which certain quarters in society have been calling for her axing.
Yes, certainly. I think we see in this move a careful act of balancing loyalty, rewarding loyalty. First, by keeping people in the same portfolios and not playing musical chairs, moving them sideways or slightly up or down. Whatever is the strategic value to a particular person, to the president, who is entering another 5 years, in a period of another 5 years, 6 years, if one comes to the election, as president of the country. He needs to unite forces and people around him who have proven their loyalty, who have proven that they see themselves as subject to him, not see themselves as more important. And then it is very important, and then we see in the current balancing act, that he shows in terms of public opinion that he does play to the court of public opinion. He does take into account that, wow, there are many investigations around Dina Pule. He has to show that he is in charge, get rid of Sexwale without having to go the route of perhaps also doing Halema Motlanthe as deputy president. That would be too obviously as an act of retribution for Mangaung. So it's a very careful balancing act in rewarding people who are loyal, keeping them close to him, but simultaneously to play that public audience and say, look, we are responsive, there are problems in certain departments, we are sensitive and we are acting on this. Mm-hmm. It is very important for this ANC to come into the time of the elections and have this act of balls in the air to say, look, we are reacting, we are responsive, accountable, we are working on certain things. Balls in the air that they can always say, but give these people time. They've only been there for a certain few months and their new departments. And now, of course, maybe they even have to change their director generals. That will take time. We are not failing. We are busy with it. We are recreating our political power. So it's such a careful balancing act. And it is more of an illusion of change, on the other hand, than it is real change. It is the minimum of changes that we see being affected here. Over the years, if we look at the first cabinet, and of course this is the fourth set of cabinet reshuffles under President Zuma, but it is his first cabinet if one takes into account the one he first announced in May 2009. Overall, we see out of the 34 departments, 16, almost half of them are exactly the same ministers in the same portfolios. And there we can accept, yes, they have done reasonably good jobs, but also when we look at the system of monitoring and evaluation, it is a very beginner system. It is still taking hold, and very often it's a very rudimentary measurement as to how well the cabinet members are performing.
Well, let's talk about monitoring and evaluation. I just want us to take a quick break, and then we'll return to our panelists, Professor Stephen Friedman, Professor Susan Boysons, and Ms. Lebohang Peku. Do call us, though, 0891 104 208. Share your opinion with us. Do you believe that this will lead to better governance and service delivery, this new cabinet that's been announced? 0891 104 208. The SMS hotline is 34701. Tweet us at AIM Live on SAFM, and email address is aimlive@sabc.co.za.
The city of Joburg is piloting the Separation at Source project to 7 out of 10 households. The aim of the project is to reduce the amount of waste ending up at our landfill sites by 2016. The target is to recycle 160,000 tons of recyclable waste per annum. Environmental management in caring cities is one of the issues to be discussed at the Metropolis annual meeting on 16 to 19 July 2013 under the theme of Caring Cities. Metropolis is a meeting of world mayors who come together to discuss issues of common concern in order to improve the quality of their citizens' lives. Joburg, proud host of world-class events, proud host of Metropolis.
Listen out for Shop Shop Children's Program on SAFM with Leon Fisser at 10 minutes to 2, Tuesdays and Thursdays.
And it is Shop Shop, it's Shop Shop from the farm road and down to the city, and it's Shop Shop, it's Shop Shop from the taxi ranks to the coast.
The Forum at 8 on SAFM.
It's 21 minutes past 8. The question we're asking on the forum today is whether or not this new cabinet announced by President Jacob Zuma will bring about good governance and service delivery. Consolidation of political power may be one thing, Professor Friedman, but some saying that this is really a tacit admission that cabinet was not functioning. We saw some of these cabinet posts renamed a few years ago, and others asked the question, will that make them more effective? But just looking at some of these portfolios, as I mentioned, some of them facing real problems. Now, if you are really trying to entrench better service delivery and governance, a position like the Deputy Minister of Justice, we've seen Andries now occupy that, but he's now been moved. And some are asking the question, why would you do that? Why would you move somebody like that who has a good record? And especially in a field of study that he understands. Perhaps you'd like to venture a guess at that, Professor Friedman?
Well, as I said earlier, I think it's very much a case of saying, look, be on your toes, don't take anything for granted, which is not a bad thing if it's connected to public credibility. I mean, if you're saying to people, look, unless you retain the confidence of the public, you're out, that's very healthy in a democracy. If you're saying to people, look, just be scared of the leadership because just remember we can cost you your job and don't get settled in your job because we can move you if we want to. That can unfortunately be the signal that's sent, and that's a very unhealthy signal. But let me say something in general about this whole process, which where I think we need some clarity. There aren't any serious monitoring and evaluation processes that you can use to test whether a cabinet minister is good or not. It's not a managerial appointment, it's a political appointment. The people in those jobs stay there as long as they have political credibility and political support. So really the only test of whether a minister should remain in the job or not is whether that minister has substantial public confidence. And that's where the Sexwale decision really sends the message that this is about politicking. It's not about public service, because whether you like Mr. Sexwale or not, and whether you think the housing ministry was doing a great job or not, the fact of the matter is that there wasn't any public pressure on him. There wasn't, there weren't people, in contrast to Angie Motshekga, in contrast to Tina Joemat-Peterson, there weren't people saying, look, you're not doing your job properly. On the contrary, some people were quite flattering. So if a minister is not antagonizing the public, if a minister doesn't seem to have a problem with the public, and that minister is then chopped, then you're really sending a signal that you don't care what the public thinks. And that's really what we should be looking for in a democracy. Are they actually listening to citizens?
Ms. Peko, I understand that you have to leave in a moment or so, but I want to go back and focus the attention on the ministers who've been sacked and the areas in which possibly they may have failed in, or the areas that they need to focus on. I mean, if we look at communications, the whole digital migration issue has been a major thing, a knowledge economy moving towards massive industrial development. And if we're looking at energy, a taxpayer or program that is likely to be funded by the taxpayer of about 1 trillion rand in terms of the nuclear program. Are these issues that should make us wonder about the appointments, or is it an opportunity for perhaps people to come with new ideas and help us achieve some of our goals? And at that, unfortunately, we just lost again, a connection not the best. But let's go back to Professor Susan Boyson. Can you perhaps answer that question?
Yes, certainly. We see so many sideways moves, so many musical chairs being played. And because the president does not share with the public, and didn't share in his announcement yesterday, the reasons for his motivation, that would, of course, have been fantastic. Also been advancing accountability to the South African public. These are really, the reasons are actually kept very close to his chest. And as Professor Friedman also says, it is not just monitoring and evaluation, and that is my exact point. It is a careful play between political appointments and monitoring and evaluation on the one side, and then alternating the two as it suits the big person in charge. And in these cases, there are no obvious reasons, and we would have loved to know the president's mind on this. There are no obvious reasons why the alternation between energy and transport are there. Both of them would seem to have been entrenching themselves in those positions, and they were not criticisms that were terribly severe as to how they had been doing it. Simultaneously, we can see the same with Andries now having done, I believe, a very good job as Deputy Minister in Justice and Constitutional Affairs. Perhaps it is for a person like that to go out and really also do a good job in the next portfolio, We have also seen, however, that several other cabinet reshuffles in the past have been aimed at people who became too good, almost too confident in their positions, and that some actions could also be, we do not know the exact mind of the president, but it could also be to keep them in their place and ensure that they do not become too big for their boots.
Let's allow Ms. Lebohang Pheko to just make a final point before she leaves. Castro and Davidson and Gift, please do stay on the line. We'll take your calls shortly. Ms. Pheko?
Okay. I didn't hear the question, but I would like to respond to what Dr. Friedman was talking about, the notion of why we need to deploy or shift competently performing ministers around. And I think he also mentioned the very key strategic failures in some of the ministries and the portfolios that have been adjusted. There are two things around that I would like to say. Number one, it could be that competently performing ministers might act as some kind of a benchmark and strengthen departments which are seen to be performing less than optimally. That's the one thing. I think the other thing, however, is that it is extremely difficult to measure good ministerial performance. It is extremely difficult because we don't really have performance management indicators in place which are known to us as the public. I mean, each department has their own set of strategic priorities which are in line and to try to fill the government mandate and to keep any semblance of the electoral promises made. But these are typically not in the public domain. They're turgid, huge, thick documents, and really, when we are thinking about how government should and ought to perform, we're typically thinking about your sound bites. So it becomes reduced to the fact that textbooks have not been delivered, or it becomes reduced to things like, beetroot, as in the case of the late Dr. Mtumang Shabalala. It becomes, notions that are very reductionist and minimalist. And I think that does a great disservice, one, to our ability to assess adequately what good and sound ministerial performance is, how this aligns with government and strategic priorities, and whether or not there is necessary alignment between the two. So it does come down to notions of popularity and perhaps who is and is not able to curry favor with the president and with other government officials. I think that, of course, the notion of skilling and inhabiting and populating ministries with people who are able to do the job because they have a passion and a capacity and a background in that is the principle that should be applied. But I think it also goes to the way that our whole public service has been structured. Unlike many countries such as Britain and